My name is Rachel, and although telling this story is a bit awkward, I feel compelled to share it. It's something very personal, so much so that I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone in my life. However, maybe by telling this story, I can release some of the weight I've been carrying. Last summer, my brother and his wife decided to take a short trip over the weekend and asked me to look after my nephew Ethan for a few days. Ethan is only 18 and incredibly intelligent. Spending time with him is always enjoyable, so I agreed without hesitation. The first day went by just like any other. Ethan and I watched movies, played games, and laughed a lot. But I had no idea that the next day would lead to one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. That morning, Ethan told me he wanted to go out. I assumed he was meeting up with his friends, and I was happy to have some time to myself. Sometimes you just need a little space, right? Once Ethan left, I went to my bedroom to unwind. I scrolled through social media for a while and then decided to watch something to boost my mood. Everything felt fine, and it never even occurred to me that Ethan might return early. But when the door suddenly opened, the shock I felt was beyond words. Ethan had caught me completely off guard. "Rachel, I forgot my keys, so I came back," he said. But the surprised look in his eyes said more than his words ever could. For a few moments, there was an uncomfortable silence. I wanted to disappear into the ground. "Ethan, why didn't you knock?" I asked, trying to fix the situation, but Ethan simply looked at me and, with a shy expression, said, "I'm sorry, Rachel, but I think I should stay here now." As I tried to make sense of what was happening, I noticed that Ethan seemed to be hiding something. "Ethan, tell me the truth," I said. And at that moment, I realized it wasn't just about that awkward moment. It was something deeper. There was a strange look in Ethan's eyes. Was it embarrassment? Or was it something else? I couldn't figure out what he was about to say, but the fact that he wasn't leaving the room made me feel even more uncomfortable. "What do you mean you need to stay? Can you explain?" I asked, my voice shaking. Ethan took a deep breath. "This might sound strange, Rachel, but this morning when I was talking to my friends, I overheard something about you." I was stunned. "About me? What did you hear?" I asked. "Yes, I think there's been some misunderstanding, but someone said they saw a video of you," he said, staring at the floor. My heart started pounding. "What video? What are you talking about, Ethan?" His face turned even redder. "I don't know, Rachel. My friends just mentioned it, and I don't know who recorded it or how, but it bothered me so much that I came back home. I didn't want to see you like this." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. What video? What kind of misunderstanding could this be? Everything felt so overwhelming in that moment. I was both angry and worried for Ethan. If what he was saying was true, this could become a serious issue for me. "Ethan, if you're hiding something, you need to tell me now. This could get both of us into trouble. Tell me exactly what you heard and saw," I said, my tone more assertive. Ethan hesitated for a moment before pulling out his phone and showing me a video, but instead of playing it, he paused. "Maybe it's better if you don't see this, but Rachel, someone might have recorded you. It could be someone trying to hurt you," he said. That's when I realized this was much bigger than I had initially thought. If someone had truly invaded my privacy and the video spread the way Ethan described, the situation could spiral out of control. I sat down and tried to collect myself. "Ethan, you need to tell me everything now. We need to figure this out together," I said. Ethan nodded and replied, "All right, Rachel, but we can't handle this alone. We need to involve the police." My heart started to race even faster. Now, I wasn't just concerned about myself. I was worried about Ethan too. If we didn't go to the right people, this could destroy both of our lives. But deep down, I sensed there was an even more complicated story behind all of this. Ethan and I just stared at each other for a moment. The silence between us made the weight of the situation feel even more intense. "Okay," I said calmly. "We'll figure this out together. But for now, don't tell anyone. Not my brother, not anyone. This has to stay between us, okay?" Ethan nodded. "I trust you, Rachel. I just don't want anyone to hurt you." His sincerity hit me deeply. Ethan was still just a kid, but in that moment, his maturity made me see him in a whole new light. From that day forward, something shifted between Ethan and me. It was like the events had brought us closer in an unexpected way. When my brother and his wife returned, we tried to act as though everything was normal. But every time Ethan and I made eye contact, I could feel that unspoken connection. Over time, Ethan began reaching out to me more often, sending messages like, "Rachel, if something's wrong, please tell me." At first, I thought his protective attitude was simply a result of what we had been through. But as the days passed, I began to sense something unusual, a warmth I couldn't fully explain. Was Ethan's concern for me more than just innocent worry? And more importantly, was I starting to feel something for him too? One evening, when my husband Thomas was out of town for work, I was home alone when another message from Ethan appeared on my phone. "I need your help, Rachel. Can I come over?" I hesitated initially, but couldn't bring myself to say no. "Come over," I texted back. When Ethan arrived, his face wore a familiar expression of concern. "Rachel, I have to tell you something," he said. "I can't stop thinking about what happened that day." I could hear the tremble in his voice. Ethan wasn't hiding anything. He just needed to talk. "Ethan, we need to move past this," I said, although I didn't even believe my own words. Ethan sat down and leaned in closer. "Rachel, you're such a special person. After everything that's happened, I've realized I feel safe when I'm with you. I need you." His words knocked the breath out of me. I didn't know how to respond, but in that moment, I understood something. The kind of closeness Ethan was offering was something I hadn't felt in years, not even in my marriage to Thomas. Ethan's honesty, his surprising maturity despite his age, pulled me toward him. As I looked at Ethan, I felt like I was battling myself. My marriage to Thomas had grown dull, monotonous. His constant focus on work made me feel invisible in my own home. But Ethan, in just a few weeks, seemed to understand me in ways Thomas never had. But what was the right thing to do? Were these feelings just a reaction to that intense moment? Or was there something real between us? That night, the conversation I had with Ethan stayed in my mind. Everything he said, the feelings, the honesty, all of it, confronted me with something I hadn't felt in a long time. The feeling of being understood. My marriage to Thomas had become routine. The same morning greetings, the same silent dinners. But when I spoke with Ethan, I felt alive. However, I knew this wasn't right. Ethan was my nephew, and the age gap between us was significant. But the connection felt uncontrollable. As days passed, Ethan and I started communicating more often. Texts, small visits. Each time he'd start with, "I was just checking in on you." But our conversations always went deeper. When I spoke with him, I felt like I could say anything I couldn't share with Thomas. Whatever was missing in my marriage seemed to be filled by Ethan's presence. One evening, Thomas told me he'd be working late. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was from Ethan. "Rachel, can I see you? We need to talk." This time, I didn't hesitate. "Sure, come over," I replied. When Ethan arrived at the door, he had a serious expression. "Rachel," he said, "I know this is strange, but I can't stop thinking about talking to you. Being with you, it makes me feel different." I looked at him, and before I could say anything, I paused for a moment. "Ethan, I feel the same way," I whispered. "But this isn't right. Thomas is my husband, and you're my nephew. We need to push these feelings aside." Ethan stepped closer. "But why?" "Thomas isn't making you happy. I can see it in your eyes. You deserve someone who values you," he said. His words struck deep. Was he right? Had my anger and disappointment with Thomas created a wall that made my connection with Ethan stronger? "Ethan, we can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "What we're feeling is just temporary confusion. I care about you so much, but if we go down this path, we'll both get hurt." Ethan sighed deeply. "You're right," he said. "But I needed to tell you this. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. Know that someone cares about you." After Ethan left that night, I spent hours reflecting. I needed to figure out how to repair my marriage with Thomas and how to establish boundaries with Ethan. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. One weekend, Thomas took the day off work. We both realized we hadn't spent much time together recently, so we planned a dinner. But no matter how hard we tried, the distance between us couldn't be bridged. During dinner, we stuck to casual topics, avoiding anything more meaningful. As usual, Thomas was absorbed in his phone, checking work emails. On the drive home, there was a heavy silence in the car. My heart felt tight, and a growing emptiness stirred inside me. I turned to Thomas. "Can you pull over? I need some fresh air." He nodded and pulled the car over. I got out and walked a few steps, trying to breathe. Thomas continued scrolling through his phone without saying a word. Then my phone buzzed. It was from Ethan. "Rachel, are you okay? I've been thinking about you." My hand shook as I replied, "I'm fine, but I don't think I can take this anymore. I can't stand this emptiness." His response came immediately. "I'm here. I'm coming to you." Within 2 minutes, Ethan was there. He saw Thomas in the car but walked straight toward me without hesitation. "Rachel, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Thomas glanced up from his phone and asked, "Why are you here, Ethan?" This was a family dinner. Ethan, undeterred, responded, "Maybe Rachel needs a little more than that." At that moment, I reached my breaking point. I had to choose between Thomas's indifference and Ethan's sensitivity toward me. I turned to Thomas, unable to stay silent any longer. "Do you realize how much you ignore me, Thomas? You sit next to me, but it's like I don't even exist." Thomas, surprised, said, "Rachel, now is not the time to discuss this." But his words didn't stop me. "It's not the right time or place, I know, but this has been going on for years and I can't carry it any longer." My eyes filled with tears. Ethan stood silently beside me, but his determined gaze moved me. "Rachel, if you want to leave, I'll take you," he said softly. Thomas said nothing. He just returned to his phone. This was a turning point. I walked over to Ethan and said, "Let's go." As we got in the car, a whirlwind of emotions filled me. Ethan drove quietly. A few minutes later, he stopped, turned to me, and asked, "Rachel, do you think we're doing the right thing?" I lowered my head, but when I looked at him, the words came out. "I don't know, Ethan, but I needed to change something." Ethan smiled gently and placed his hand on my shoulder. "Then we're starting here." In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same.